to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest, Sue Stuart-Smith. And she's here to share with us her new book, The Well-Gardened Mind, The Restorative Power of Nature. With anxiety and depression at record levels, can being outside restore well-being? Our special guest today is here to discuss just that. As a distinguished psychiatrist and avid gardener, Sue will be sharing the healing effects of gardening and its ability to decrease stress and foster well-being in our everyday lives. So let's talk a little bit about Sue's background. She's a prominent psychiatrist and psychotherapist, took her degree in English literature at Cambridge before qualifying as a doctor. She worked in the National Health Service for many years, becoming the lead clinician for psychotherapy. She currently teaches at Tavistock Clinic in London, is a consultant to the Dock Health Service, and is a celebrated garden designer. She has over 30 years' experience with her husband, and together they created the wonderful barn garden. So let's welcome to the show, Sue Stuart-Smith.
I'm thrilled to be with you today.
Yeah, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. And I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, that's an interesting question, really, because I was inspired on a number of different levels. And I suppose it's probably good to start with the sort of earliest formative inspiration, which was the story of my grandfather that I grew up with. And he was a prisoner of war during the First World War in Turkey. And by the end of the war, by the time he got home, he was very malnourished and extremely traumatized. And he then got the opportunity about 18 months later, when he'd regained enough physical strength, to enroll on a year-long horticulture rehabilitation scheme for servicemen like him. And that really changed his life. It gave him a lifelong love of gardening. He recovered, peace of mind. He went on, he lived to be 72. He was healthy. And so I grew up with that in the background, I suppose, the idea that gardening really can be deeply restorative. And I think I then sort of probably forgot about it in a way. It just becomes part of your background. And it was only really when I began to garden myself and started to feel the benefits of it. As a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, I was doing quite a stressful job. And I realized that if I didn't garden at the weekend, the stress was sort of beginning to accumulate on me. So these things came together, actually, my own personal experience and my family history.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us because my goodness, you could just see the profound impact it made on your family, and to think at how it can help other people throughout their journey, and that journey of being healed is such an important thing.
It is an important thing, and I think it's not a quick fix, and I think we do live in a time when people increasingly do look for quick fixes, although I think there is a growing recognition that many of them, they help up to a point, and maybe they don't last either. So you have to be prepared to invest the time in for gardening and be patient. You have to work with the seasons. I think to really feel the benefits of gardening, you need to see a garden through a year, really, and to experience the whole cycle. Having said that, actually, a lot of research studies show that people benefit enormously within weeks. So it's not as if you're not going to, but you will get benefits. But the really deeper benefits, I think, come sort of after a longer time.
So for those people that are in spaces, maybe in downtowns or cities, how can they incorporate gardening into their life to bring that kind of fulfillment to themselves?
Well, I think this is actually one of the things that the pandemic has really brought attention to, is the huge difference in well-being for people who have access to green space, whether that's parks or gardens, and those who don't, because it's been such a lifeline for so many people during this very difficult time. So I think things need to happen on a sort of civic level, on a social level, in terms of making spaces more accessible. But actually, there's a lot you can do if you have a balcony or a windowsill. You can create a window box on plants inside the house, indoor plants. So I think it's important not to feel excluded from it, and also investigate what opportunities there are if you don't have a garden for getting involved in a local urban farm or a volunteer scheme for gardening, or a community garden.
I think those are great suggestions because a lot of times people think, oh, I have no green space around me. It's not going to work, without thinking, gosh, I can volunteer some time at a local farm and be there.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And one of the other things about community gardening that's been shown in a great number of studies is the enormous benefit people experience from connecting to others through growing food, through sharing produce, through all the shared pleasures that a garden brings. So it's very effective at reducing feelings of isolation and loneliness. And actually, in the NHS in England, there's an increasing tendency for GPs to prescribe volunteering at a gardening project like that as part of their care, either in addition to medication or as an alternative to it.
Oh, I think that is so important, because there's something about putting your hands in the soil and working with plants and being close to nature that just fulfills a person's soul.
Yes, it does, and I think it works on us through so many different channels and levels. There's a great deal of science now that shows at a neurological level, brain level, we benefit from that kind of connection with nature, and that's because we evolved as a species in a natural environment, and lots of aspects of our neurochemistry and our physiology are tuned in to responding to nature. So that's one level on which it works. But it's a very accessible form of creativity, gardening, because if you think about a seed, it's already got all that creative potential within it. We help unlock it. So it's very rewarding in terms of the amount of self-esteem it can give you, and the sense of pride it can give people when other avenues of those kind of feelings may be closed off to them.
Now, so what are some of the just benefits? I know we've talked about a couple of them, but what are some of the benefits of just being in nature?
Well, we know, for example, that within minutes of entering a green space, or actually viewing a sort of natural green sort of flourishing landscape, so it can just be nature scenery, that people's blood pressure decreases, their heart rate decreases, and they, after about 20 minutes, their levels of cortisol, the stress hormone cortisol, also reduced. And a number of studies have measured that, both in gardening and also just being out in nature, walking in nature. So we know that it has an anti-stress effect, and that's a very important element to it. There are also some very intriguing findings relating, for example, to how important the having contact with the soil is, and the microbiome, the bacteria in the soil. And again, this is quite a new area in terms of our growing recognition that too much hygiene is not necessarily good for the immune system, that we do need exposure to what's become known as friendly bacteria. So that through getting your hands in the soil, you're benefiting both your physical and your mental health.
So when someone's a new gardener, what are some of the common things they worry about that maybe they need to kind of not really get into too much?
I think people can worry about all sorts of things, and I think the world of plants can feel very alien if you've never worked with plants. So I think what's important is to find yourself a kind of plant mentor, and that might be through a friend or through wandering into a community gardening scheme or an urban farm, or looking online. There's fantastic resources out there now, helping people to get going, because I think it's really important to not to get going in the right way, so that you do get the benefits and you do feel the pleasures of it, because actually, of course, like all things, it can be very disheartening if things go wrong. So and the advice I always give is to start growing things that are easy, that whether that's sort of easy annual flowers or easy produce to grow, so that you get out of the starting blocks, as it were.
I love that. I think that's great advice because you often hear people say, oh my goodness, you either get people that are really good at growing stuff and other people are just like everything I touch dies. So for the folks that are just having like a difficult time getting in that mind space that they can actually, have a plant that would thrive, what would you say to them?
I would say I think anybody can have a green thumb, actually, but it is about finding also the plants that you like and that seem to like you. And I don't mean that in a sort of cookie way, but that perhaps suit your environment. I've had all sorts of gardening failures, and it's often been from trying to grow the wrong thing in the wrong kind of soil, or from overwatering a plant that doesn't need much water. Everybody makes these kind of mistakes. So, but the great thing now is that a lot of this information is out there, and there's some really good apps as well as online resources that can sort of give you all that kind of advice.
Well, I love also getting advice from the different gardening centers too, because they have some really knowledgeable
Yes,
people
they
there.
do. That's a very good point, actually. I agree completely. Yeah, you can always go and ask people at the garden centres as well.
So, my goodness, your book is filled with so much great information and insights. And one thing that I was really surprised about in your book, you talk about the Insight Garden program that was actually developed for the prison system. And I'd love for you to share that with our listeners and just the information on that. I found that fascinating.
Yeah, there are two prison gardening programs that I write about in the book. The Insight Garden program was started at San Quentin in California, and actually that program's now grown, and there are 8 gardening programs in other prisons across California. And the other one I write about is on Rikers Island, the jail complex in New York, which is run by the Horticultural Society of New York. And again, that's actually been going even longer. It's been going nearly 30 years. And that's also grown, and there are now 8 gardens at Rikers. And I think there's two things worth saying about those projects are that one of the things that makes them very successful is that they offer internships, or they link people to horticultural schemes or community gardening schemes after they leave prison. And that's crucial, because whatever gets kick-started in prison in terms of realizing this might be something somebody can do and it might help them change their lives, that period after coming out of jail is when people are most vulnerable to returning to crime. And both these programs have a similar level of success in terms of reducing reoffending. So the normal, the standard kind of reoffending rate is that about 60% of people return to jail within 2 or 3 years. And the figures for both the Hort and the Insight gardening program are that the people who complete their schemes, the reoffending rate is only 10 to 15%, which really does show, the enormous difference that gardening can make. I think it helps people's self-belief. It helps people believe in the possibility of change. And some of the things I was talking about earlier, that it makes creativity accessible. It's a very affirming thing to do, and it's something you can share and that other people enjoy.
I think you come from such a unique perspective, because just with the benefits of gardening itself, plus your background, you can really dig into, what is inspiring people, what's helping keep them motivated. You talk about just, how with the prison system, how it's helping the inmates that are there. I think there's so much that ties into that. It's so inspiring.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that was one of my motivations for writing the book. Was I felt that gardening can help people in so many different ways and on such a deep level, and I really wanted to try to understand that and communicate it. And it's not an easy thing to do, because a lot of what happens between us and plants, in fact, everything that happens between us and plants, is happening at a non-verbal level. It's a relationship that we form, which has got nothing to do with language, which actually is one of the benefits of it. It's free of all the complexities of human relationships. But equally, that makes it involved a lot of work. Talking to people, investigating my own experiences as well, and thinking about them to try to sort of really communicate that and understand that.
I love that. Well, and I know in your book you also talk about, how gardening can be a form of political resistance. And over history, there's been some instance of that. I'd love for you just to share a little bit about that with our listeners.
Well, yes, I think gardening. Yeah, there have been various times in history when the sort of more radical aspects of gardening have come to the fore, and I think it's we've seen that at various points with, for instance, the guerrilla gardening movement, and also the community gardening movement that started in the 1970s, particularly in New York. So what you tend to see is that whenever there are times of crisis, whether that's a financial crash or whatever the cause is, that people return to these sort of the basic kind of empowerment and self-sustaining qualities that growing your own food can give. So one of the people I interview in the book is Ron Finley, the gangster gardener, who is based in South Central LA, and he's made it his mission really to combat the sense of stigma that can arise with the idea of getting your hands in the soil and working the earth, and that can be seen as demeaning, and actually to understand that that it is a way of empowering yourself to be able to feed yourself, at least in some measure, and feed yourself more nourishing food. So there are all sorts of ways in which gardening can be quite political.
And who would have think, that would have been, even been a thing to have gardening be a political statement. But, it's so important. And my goodness, when you talk about, in your book, you talk about breaking the cycles of violence and drug addiction, and how important green spaces are for young people, in that whole process. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about that with us.
Yes, I interviewed some of the kids who were attending a program run by the Chicago Botanic Garden called the Windy City Youth Harvest. And these were kids who were at risk. And the garden really gave them a very precious, safe safe space for a start. You know, in an environment where the streets weren't safe and often their homes weren't particularly safe either. So I think that's something that not to be underestimated at all. The power of that once you give people that kind of environment, how much they can begin to grow. And what I felt very strongly through these youth projects, because I visited quite a few in the UK as well, is that really you can see people growing alongside the plants. You know, the two things happen in parallel when you bring them together like that.
Is that something you see no matter if it's in the States, in England, just across the globe, it has that type of impact?
I think when people are most in need, as it were, and are most deprived of all these things, it can have a very, very big impact indeed. Yes, absolutely. And I think, you know, it's not about, you know, the youth projects I visited were not about, as it were, you know, training people to work in horticulture. It was about allowing them to feel that they could really do something worthwhile and contribute and be part of a group who were all working together to do this, you know, whether it was producing food to sell in the market, you know, which then helps fund the project. Or some of the projects actually involve then taking that food to homeless shelters. So the whole thing then becomes a very sort of self-esteeming enterprise.
Well, I know we've covered quite a bit, but I'd love for you to share an example of just how nature has really impacted a community. And you've got so many great examples in your book.
Well, the one that's probably closest to home, although it's not that close to my home, it's in the north of England, and I think it is a fantastic project. It is called the Incredible Edible Project, which is based in Todmorden, which was a centre for manufacturing, a very important centre from the Industrial Revolution onwards, really. But in the last 20 years or so has suffered very badly from post-industrial decline with a lot of closed factories and so on. So the town was really languishing about 10 years ago before this project started. And there was a growing amount of deprivation and vandalism in the town and high levels of unemployment. And it was started by a group of women who just began by planting vegetables and sowing seeds on a plot in the middle of the town outside a disused, rather derelict health centre. And they put up a sign that said, "Help yourself," and invited people, anybody who lived in the town, to begin helping themselves to this produce. And it took off quite quickly, and people were mobilised by it and started volunteering, and they created about 70 food grain plots around the town, either in bits of disused space or creating planters. For instance, they asked the police station if they could create a raised planter on the pavement outside the police station. And you know, it's led on quite quickly. After a year or 2 years, the high street was beginning to sort of sell more food, more healthy food. You know, restaurants began to open up. People were attending fortnightly sort of town gardening, morning of gardening, and then coming together to have a meal together in an empty church. So at all sorts of levels, it's really transformed a community that was suffering in all sorts of ways. And that Incredible Edible model has really spread throughout the world now. There are over 1,000 projects who kind of adopt the same kind of principles of gardening in that way.
Oh my goodness, I love that. I think that that's so empowering because, you know, at the same time, it's teaching people how to be involved within their community and give back in many ways.
Yes, it is, and I think, you know, in a way, it comes back to what I said earlier about combating isolation and loneliness. That nature, working with nature seems to help connect people. And we don't entirely understand how that comes about. Some of it is simply through being in the natural world. And there are studies that have shown, for example, that when people are surrounded by plants, or even actually having indoor plants around them, when psychologists have run tests that measure things like empathy and generosity, that the presence of plants shifts people quite significantly towards being just that bit more generous or empathetic. And that for me, that's one of the most fascinating findings that I came across in the course of researching the book.
Oh my goodness. I mean, how important is that? I think we need more people who are compassionate, empathetic now more than ever.
Yes, we will do. And I think, gardening has already proved very important to many people in this crisis. And I hope when we eventually begin to sort of come out of it, that these kind of, in terms of community rebuilding and helping people, emerge from this state of, I suppose, social dislocation that we've been through, that these kind of projects could really play a very, very beneficial role.
So when someone comes to see you in your practice, how do you kind of, dovetail the gardening aspect to the work that you're doing?
I don't practice as a horticultural therapist. I practice as a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist. And I specialize in, I think, what you would call in the US physician health. So I work with doctors suffering from stress and burnout, depression, and various mental issues like that. And one of the things I always look at is how much they're getting outdoors and how much contact with nature they're having, because working in a hospital is actually, it's a very easy way to get every level deprived of nature. Many, like emergency departments, don't have windows. You don't even get much daylight, let alone views of trees or anything like that. So I always look at that, and it depends on people's circumstances whether gardening is something they feel able to do or even have space that they could do it in. But I always encourage people to take exercise outdoors, because green exercise, and by that I mean exercising in a park, for example, green exercise has been shown to be much more beneficial for us than exercising in a gym, and that comes down to the effects on heart rate and blood pressure and on our mental state as well. So that's really the main thing that I look at in terms of lifestyle.
Yeah, well, thank you for the work that you're doing for first responders. My goodness, I mean, our doctors and nurses are so overwhelmed at this point. And to be able to have somebody that can help them kind of work through that part and reconnect with nature, I can't think of a more important thing.
Yes, you're right. It's been, I think, unprecedented in how difficult it's been, and how suddenly doctors and nurses have been plunged into managing an illness that we don't fully understand, and in such a high volume of cases as well. So I think we know the after effects of this are going to be with us for quite a long time, and I think nature could play a very important role in helping people recover from all the many different kinds of stresses and losses that they would have been through.
So, Sue, what final thoughts would you like to leave our listeners with today?
I think really just to make the point that that getting out into nature is good for you in whatever form that is, but also to make sure that you're not that you really are engaging with your surroundings. If you're plugging your headphones in and sort of walking with your head down, you're not going to get the same level of benefit. So I very much encourage people to practice, in a way, a kind of mindfulness in nature. And by that I mean allowing yourself to attend to all the different sensory impressions, whether that's the birds singing or the noise of the wind in the trees, all the different colors and the way the light is shining through the leaves, for instance, or simply the feeling of the ground under your feet. All of those things make a big difference to how much benefit you will get from spending time in nature.
Well, Sue, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your book, The Well-Gardened Mind, and be part of your community?
Well, the book is available on all the major bookstores and all the main online outlets. It's also available as an ebook and an audiobook read by me. So the book is quite accessible. I've got a website, which is quite simply SueStuart-Smith.com. And I'm on Twitter. Again, it's just at Sue Stuart-Smith, and I'm same on Instagram. So I think if people Google me, I hope they will find all these links.
Well, Sue, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thanks. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Sue. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Well-Gardened Mind, The Restorative Power of Nature. The Well-Gardened Mind is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, you can get it on Kindle. Again, if you'd like to connect with Sue, you can at SueStuart-Smith.com for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.